There we go. Okay, well, welcome back to another Female Athlete Monthly meeting hosted by the Women's Sport and Exercise Academic Network and the Period of the Period. Again, it's so nice to see many of you who signed up and those who are on the call as well. So thank you so much for showing that continued support, even on a lovely evening. And as usual, a big welcome to those who are also on our Facebook live stream as well. Just one thing to note for those on there from previous meetings, I know that you can't all submit your questions directly to this, but if you're on Facebook and do have a question, feel free just to message on there as normal, and then I'll make sure to keep a lookout when it comes to the Q&A at the end as well. So if you are a Female Athlete Monthly Meet regular, like many of you are, you probably already know how these webinars work. But if you're new here, then these meetings run every month, and each month we have a new guest presenter or sometimes presenters sharing some of their research or experience working in this area. And we try to cover that broad range of topics all related to those female specific considerations in sport and exercise, so from the menstrual cycle all the way through menopause, etc. And basically how it works is I'll briefly introduce you to tonight's speaker in a moment and then hand you over to her, and then we'll finish with a Q&A at the end as well. And as usual, I'll ask you all to remain on mute during the talk, and then just pop any questions that you have in the chat, and I'll keep an eye out for them at the Q&A at the end. Or you can feel free to unmute yourself and come on and chat as well. So just a little reminder before we get going with tonight's session that there'll be no meeting in August because we're taking a little break and reset before that academic year starts again. But we will be resuming back with these meetings in September with even more brilliant talks lined up as well. Additionally, if you're listening and would like to present any research in the future at one of these meetings, then do get in touch. Or if you have any topics that you'd like to be covered, then do contact us as well and we can arrange for that as well. So this evening we're very lucky to be joined by Liz, and Liz is the Insight Manager at Women in Sport. So it's a charity founded in 1984 with the vision of that no one is excluded from the joy, fulfillment and lifelong benefits of sport. So something that everyone in this chat can definitely agree on, and their work is focused on securing change by understanding the needs and aspirations of all women and girls at each of their life stages so that they can break down gender inequalities in sport and beyond as well. And on top of this, they're also leaders in driving sort of new research in this area and creating sort of inspiring campaigns to empower women and girls to be active as well. And within the charity, Liz's specific role involves managing the charity's insight work and supporting, monitoring and evaluating their projects. And today she's going to be presenting on some of their latest work, which is focused on inspiring women to be active during midlife and menopause. So yes, without any further ado, I'll hand you over to Liz now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kelly. And you've done such a good job introducing me that basically I can just skip my first slide now. So let me just share my slides. And there we go. And let me make sure. Yeah. Okay. So Kelly's done a brilliant job of introducing women in sport and me. So I'm Liz. We can move on from this slide now. So thank you. So I'm going to be sharing with you today, as Kelly said, our research on midlife and menopause. But before I do that, I really want to give some context. And Kelly sort of hinted there at the fact that we really look at women's life stages when we think about researching their barriers and motivations, because as I'm sure all of you on the call already know, women and girls are less active than men and boys at every stage of life. And we know that there are different physical pressures on women and societal expectations as well that come into play at different times of their lives to create that the fact that women are less active. So I just want to touch on the life stages leading up to midlife before delving really deeply into this research. So, we start with primary girls, that sort of 5 to 11 age range, and already girls are experiencing gender stereotypes at this age. We know from the Girl Guiding Girls' Attitude surveys every year that girls already think that boys are stronger, and boys indeed already think that boys are stronger, that they're better at sport, and that sport is meant for boys and not for girls. And we also know that girls' opportunities to play team sport are much more limited at this age than boys' opportunities. Then we move into the teenage years, and we're really looking obviously at puberty, changing bodies, and that sort of steals girls' confidence. and they feel very observed and looked at almost too much, they tell us. And so sport becomes a stage that they are very uncomfortable on in a lot of cases. And then we move into adulthood, and especially for those starting a family, women really become those primary caregivers quite often. And that stage is set as women are the people that care for others, especially children, and that they don't have that permission to take time for themselves to be active. So we find that that really starts as women start to have families, and really, as we'll talk about today, continues into midlife. And actually during midlife, almost the opposite problem to the teenage girls, women feel overlooked. They feel like they don't matter anymore. And that is sort of generally in life, but also in the sports sector. And we will talk about that more as during this presentation. And then, of course, we have later life. And we know that taking action in midlife can actually stave off some of those injuries and illnesses that can happen in later life. But we're missing an opportunity. And that sort of missed opportunity in midlife that could change and improve quality of life in the long term is really one of the big reasons why we focused on midlife. So why focus on this life stage? Well, that's one of the reasons, that opportunity. But we also know that women feel overlooked and that they need more support during this life stage. And we know that 33% of women in midlife, which I'm defining here as around 40 to 60, 33% of those women are not active enough. And that number rises with women in lower socioeconomic groups to 50%. So actually, that's quite shocking. On the other hand, previous research that we did before this piece has actually told us that women see menopause as a time of reappraisal. So actually, it's a time when you're thinking about how you spend your time, what you value, and potentially taking up new activities, including physical activity. So this is really clearly a time when that opportunity exists, and when we really need to be taking it up to get to women before they sort of start to lose their fitness and their physicality, so that we can get them to embrace exercise and physical activity, find something they love that they can then stick with. And that opportunity is really why we focused on midlife. Now, I have a feeling that most people watching this presentation are gonna know quite a bit about menopause, but unfortunately, there is just so much misinformation out there that I did just want to run through some of the basics very quickly. The average age of menopause is 51. Now, I should tell you what the definition of menopause is, which is actually 1 day, 12 months after a woman's last period. That's all menopause technically is. But actually, we know that it lasts for years, and the period before menopause is actually called perimenopause. And this is when women's hormones are fluctuating massively. And that's often what results in these sort of physical and psychological symptoms that women experience, and are often quite challenging for women to deal with. And the average period of experiencing those symptoms is 4 years, but women can experience them for much, much longer. So I think, the most well-known symptom, of course, is hot flushes and night sweats. But there's so much more than that. I think insomnia is a huge one, and that can be as a result of night sweats, but it can also be sort of unrelated to those night sweats. Joint pain, headaches, palpitations, sore muscles, weight gain, fatigue, all of these things, plus more physical symptoms. And then the sort of cognitive psychological symptoms, which we found were more surprising and unexpected for most women. They really had never expected to experience something like this during menopause. And these can include anxiety, depression, low mood, irritability, forgetfulness, that sort of brain fog and difficulty concentrating. And these really took women by surprise. We don't talk about these symptoms as nearly as much as we talk about those hot flushes. We also know that following the onset of menopause, women have some greater health risks around cardiovascular disease, and especially around joints and bones, because your bones are weakened because you've lost estrogen. So there's all of these things happening around menopause the symptoms are quite intense and can last a long time, and the health implications are real as well. We also know, though, that exercise can help with both the symptoms and the health implications. Again, this is a really important time to be talking to women about exercise. So I'll now move on into the actual research. You can see on this slide the details of what we did. we really embarked on this project to understand what is going on for women at midlife, including but not limited to the menopause. And so to understand this, we followed 30 women across 5 months through a really iterative process that allowed us to develop relationships with them and really get to the heart of the barriers that existed in terms of exercising. And at the end, with 8 of the women, we did a exercise exploration where we spent 4 weeks with them, getting them to pick an activity, research it, and then go out and do it in that 4-week period. And that really allowed us to be right there alongside them while they were getting active. So we weren't, waiting on them to report back about how they felt, weeks, months later. We were actually right there with them, following their journey, which was really helpful. Just want to point out that this research was specifically with women in lower socioeconomic groups. And that's because of those stats I was saying earlier, that we know that women in all age groups actually in lower socioeconomic groups are less likely to meet the activity guidelines. And we just know that that comes with additional barriers, resources being a pretty big barrier. And also important to note that our research was with inactive women. So we really found that we got 2 types of women. One was lapsed exercisers who had been more active when they were younger, but had since lapsed into inactivity. And the other group of women was just women who never had really found something that they enjoyed. So they'd never been particularly active at all. So before I launch into the findings, I'm going to share a video that will allow the women themselves to share in their own words what their barriers and motivations around exercise are. Just bear with me while I optimize the video clip, and here we go.
Sometimes I get to the point where I think I can't cope anymore. It's all too much, or sometimes I think, oh my God, everyone's just taking advantage of me. I'm sick of running around, I'm tired, I need a break.
Menopause has had a great impact on my health and really changed me as a person. I feel, where has all this time gone? How come people didn't talk about it, or I didn't get the advice and information that I needed?
It's almost like it's something that we have to go through in silence.
The older I get, the more I'm reflecting on my life. Now I'm getting older, my quality of life won't be as good if the health isn't there. I'm seeing that with my dad. I do look at my dad and think, I don't want to be like that.
I joined the gym, and for a full year I used to go religiously 3 or 4 times a week, and I lost loads of weight. And then my mum needed to have knee surgery, and then it all stopped because I needed to look after her.
I think the thing that's stopping me is me. Looking at all the fit young people in the pictures for the gym, I feel a bit intimidated.
I've never been an exerciser and I've always found it hard. I've tried gyms, I've tried everything, and I really don't like it.
They have exercise equipment in the parks, but although they are a good idea to have, I would feel like an idiot using them in a public space. I think we are an untapped market. If they actually offered something relevant to us, I'd say they'd be pushing at an open door.
Let me just de-optimize. Apologies. Let's see, there we go. All right, there we go. So that's the women themselves, and you can hear from them some of those frustrations about the barriers they're facing. And from what they told us, we developed what you can see on the screen here, which is our midlife, menopause, and exercise model. And this is just the first half of that model with the midlife and menopause. So in terms of the midlife factors, I'll just talk you through a couple of them. We talked about the health concerns, potential injuries, and decreasing physicality. Depending on when women are going through menopause, if they're a bit on the older end, that decreasing physicality is starting to weigh in. They're starting to realize they're maybe not quite as able to do what they once did. And so that's weighing on their minds. I think massively we saw that need to prioritize others over themselves. And we know that women have huge caring responsibilities, and that quite often their caring responsibilities come earlier than men's. Men's quite often tend to happen after they retire, because often it's their spouse they're looking after. And that's, in your later life, in your 70s and your 80s. Whereas women are caring for children, they're caring for parents, they're caring for siblings, neighbors. The sort of network that women have been found to be caring for is much wider than the network that men care for. So this is coming at the same time as their career responsibilities as well. And we know that a record number of women are in employment now. I think it's up to 75%. So that's more than we've ever had in history. So women are increasingly, they're in this sandwich generation now where they've had kids later, their parents are living longer, so they're caring for both parents and kids and that wider network. They're also working, much more likely to be working than ever before. So there's this huge time pressure, this real sense that if they took a step back and took an hour for themselves, that things might actually fall apart. And so, as a society, I feel quite strongly we need to be addressing that. But I'll put that to one side because that's a different soapbox. But also in terms of the midlife factors, I think there's obviously this need for connection and belonging as well. So that sense of isolation becomes more intense can become more intense during midlife. And that's partly about menopause as well. Here on the right, we have stigma with menopause, which I'll talk about more in a moment. And I think that feeds into that need for connection and belonging. Got a couple of quotes here from women in our research. One talking about her health condition and how that actually makes it harder for her to know what physical activity she can do. And that was a real concern from women about, if I have an injury in my wrist or my ankle, or I have osteoarthritis or whatever, is there actually something I can do, or do I just have to sort of pack it in and be done with physical activity, which of course is not the case, but they do need more support in that case. We heard this time and again, her needs came after her family's needs, just full stop. Being tied up with caring for parents. This woman was living with her dad for 8 weeks because he'd come out of hospital and just needed round the clock support. So, that's huge time commitment and does just leave very little time for yourself. And then there's this sense of, this was around menopause in particular, having all these different feelings and emotions and basically not wanting to burden anyone else with those feelings and emotions. So again, that real sense of isolation and the need to sort of connect and belong and have someone just to talk to about what you're going through. So then on the other side of things with menopause, the two really physical symptoms that people told us about, number one was poor sleep and exhaustion. And this really set up a vicious cycle where I had a horrible night's sleep for whatever reason, woke up immediately on the caffeine and the sugar just to help them get through, crashing all day because that's not a very sustainable way to get energy, coming home, having a takeaway because you just are too exhausted to cook, going into bed, maybe having wine, which then of course disrupts your sleep, and then it all starts over again. But they couldn't get out of this cycle because they were just so exhausted. And part of this can be because of night sweats. One woman here, I think she just describes it perfectly. One minute I'm up, next minute I'm down, up and down all night because she just can't get comfortable. And then another one, I love this quote: I grab a packet of chocolate, my reward for lack of sleep and my zombie headache. That's really hard to get over. And we'll talk about it in a minute with exercise. How do you get the motivation to exercise, the energy when that's how you're feeling? And then the psychological elements, those definitely came through in our research as well. And like I said before, that was actually surprising to women. They just didn't expect those psychological elements. And I think women were, apologies, I'm going to go back to the physical, because the other big issue that women told us about was weight gain. I missed that, apologies. Weight gain was a really big issue for women, more from an emotional side, in the sense that they were ashamed of their weight gain. Really shockingly ashamed, I would say. You know, they were so embarrassed by the amount of weight they'd put on. And it was really, it really became apparent that that was actually a big barrier to taking part in organized physical activity, because they were so ashamed. So then moving on to those psychological symptoms, irritability was a huge thing. And women just said they felt like they changed as a person. So women said, I used to be a really calm, easygoing person, and now it's like, my teenager leaves his shoes in the hallway or something, innocent like that, and I'm instantly a different person and I'm screaming at him. And it was really worrisome to them. They were especially worried about the way their families would react. And a lot of them said, well, my family's putting up with me for now, but I don't know how much longer this is going to go on. And so there's that sort of irritability, but also the worry about how it's affecting their relationships. And then, of course, we talked about some of that stigma and that isolation and loneliness, really feeling like they couldn't talk about their experiences. I think, we say over and over again, it's almost becoming a cliche that menopause is the last taboo. It's absolutely true. These women did not feel like they could talk about it. They felt like menopause was the butt of everyone's jokes, and that they felt almost like they were irrelevant now. Like, okay, you've had your family, you move past the first bloom of youth, and so we don't really want to see you anymore in society. Move on, which is a horrible feeling, but definitely came through quite strongly. And here, again, woman just reiterating, no one's talking about it. It's this huge change of life, but nobody's talking about it. So what does all of this mean for exercise? So this is the bottom half of the model. And we use the COM-B model of behavior change to look at these barriers to activity. So looking at capability, opportunity, and motivation as the necessary means to create behavior change. And what we found really with this is that with capability, women really had a limited view of what exercise could be. So when we asked them, they told us running, swimming, walking, and the gym. And that was it. That was all that registered. Team sports didn't even get a look in. So that's already, quite limiting. They're limiting themselves as to what they could do. We also had a lot of women who sort of self-identified as not sporty, and these were especially the women who'd never been particularly active in their lives. So somewhere along the way, they just decided that sport wasn't for them, or someone in their lives had made fun of them for being active, or they hadn't done well in PE or whatever it was, and they had just taken this badge of not sporty, and it had grown and grown and grown, and they could not think of themselves as active people anymore. And then sort of lower down, I would say, in terms of capability, we did find some health issues, like I've spoken about, declining fitness levels, and then, of course, lack of energy. When you aren't sleeping, if you aren't prone to exercise, then exercise is probably the last thing you want to do if you're tired. So again, from this woman here, oh my God, there is nothing more boring than the gym. And this is a problem, because the gym was one of the only things she saw as exercise. So if you think that the only thing that is out there for you is incredibly boring, that's a huge barrier that you have to overcome. And then another says, I have so many negative images of exercise in my past, and I'm just not looking forward to it. And actually using the word scary, that was quite common in our exercise trial before the women took that step of being active. A lot of them used that word. They were scared to take part. So, I mean, and here we go with it, the energy and the hot and sweaty feelings. And, that's what's holding this woman back. She's feeling day after day, she's tired and she's sluggish and she's unmotivated. And I think for people who exercise regularly, they look at that and think, well, energy and exercise can give you energy. We know that. But I think until you feel that for yourself, it's almost counterintuitive, the idea that being active can actually make you more energetic. So then in terms of opportunity, I mean, I talked about the embarrassment about weight, and this was just so pervasive. So, some women have told us that they get up at 4 in the morning to go running because they're so embarrassed by their weight that they don't want to be seen. And other women, and another woman in this research actually said to us, I'm too heavy to go to the gym. I'd have to lose weight before I even step foot in the gym. So this is a really strong barrier, I think. And it's something to me that's not about the weight, but actually much more about the fear of ridicule, which comes further down. And that fear of ridicule was about physique, but also about age, about being too old to be in a space like the gym. Also fear of not being able to keep up. So in like a Zumba class, for instance, just being terrified of moving wrong, bumping into someone, whatever it was, and feeling like they would get made fun of. And then you add in the shame about menopause symptoms as well. So those hot flushes, having those in front of someone is quite embarrassing. And other symptoms as well. There were a whole range that can lead to really embarrassing things happening. So there was, that additional shame. And then there was this real sense that exercise spaces, and especially gyms, were not for these women. I think they said to us really clearly that in the ads for gyms, they saw young, thin, toned women, and that was not them. And they really didn't see any women like them represented in that space. And then, of course, the last bit of the opportunity is, just basic access, transport, cost, time it takes to commit to an activity. But actually, once we did the exercise trial, a lot of these sort of faded away, especially with virtual activities available in people's homes, often for free. A lot of those sort of lower end opportunity issues faded away a bit. And it was really the stuff higher up in these bullet points that was the real issue. So I've just got a few quotes here, So I had so many quotes from women about being overweight, going red very easily, feeling embarrassed, that it was hard to pick one because there were just so many. Here we go, again, I'm large, classes are full of 9-stone skinny lycra wearing people. It's not the space for me. I don't feel like I belong. And here again, this fear of being ridiculed, of not fitting in. So this sense of belonging is a real issue. And women just don't feel like these spaces are for them. And then we get to the end here around motivation. The first thing is around not relating exercise benefits to their own needs. So everyone in the world, we know from surveys, knows that exercise is good for them. It's like we all know that we need to be eating our 5+ servings of veg, but that's not a motivation in and of itself anymore to be active. So there are a lot of psychological benefits, especially so in improved well-being, sense of calm, socializing, opportunity to make new friends. There are all of these benefits for women, as well as physical benefits like strengthening their bones at a time that they need to do that. Just all of these things that actually speak more to the women's needs in the moment. Improved sleep as well, that's another one. But we aren't speaking to them about those benefits. So we aren't relating exercise clearly to their needs in this time of their life. Fear of judgment, we've already talked about. I think that's really strong. Another is just not thinking that they'll enjoy exercise. And we heard, saw some quotes from women under the capability barrier about saying, I just have so many bad experiences. Why am I going to enjoy this? So that just automatic motivation or lack of motivation because they think it'll be miserable. We've talked about prioritizing others' needs. That's a big one. And then worrying about going alone. I think that quite often, sort of almost counterintuitively, going alone to something like an exercise class for the first time, if you mess up, you're mortified and embarrassed. And you sort of go away thinking I'm so stupid. If you take a friend along, you just laugh it off together. And I think we all have had that experience when we're in a new place, not quite sure what's going on, that actually it can be a relief. It can be a story for later. And so actually being able to bring a friend along can matter quite a lot. So I've just got some quotes here, condition myself to think of exercise as painful, humiliating, and not fun. And then another, talking about time. So as I've grown older, I have less time to spend as I choose. And then a woman saying exactly what I just said, who would I go with? I wouldn't go on my own. So that's sort of how that midlife and menopause model then translates into exercise and the barriers to being active. So I just want to take a minute to talk about then our exercise trial in a little bit more detail. And I think the first thing to say is that there is a strong desire amongst women to be more active. So here you can see these stats, which are from our previous piece of research, clearly showing that even 84% of inactive women in this life stage want to be more active. So we know that the desire is there, but we have to be able to help them overcome all those barriers that we just talked about. So actually, when we did this 4-week exercise trial, what we did, we essentially had a researcher paired with each woman, and the researcher spoke to the woman every week, checked in with her, sort of was almost like a emotional support, researched activities that were available in her area, supported her process of researching as well, checked in on the 3rd week when she was expected to be active, and then sort of followed up in the 4th week to see how she was doing. And all of those things really served to support all of the women who took part in this to be active in a way that they just had never had support like that before. And when they actually did that, whatever activity it was, for some it was a dance class, for some it was a walking group, all of these different things, they felt all of these different psychological rewards that you see on the screen. So feeling sort of virtuous, like I did what I said I was going to do, I've been good. That sort of calming exhale moment where, you know, when you're active, you're in the present tense, you're not sort of on the hamster wheel of life. That improved well-being, that sense of calm, focusing on themselves, which felt really good. You know, they felt all of this. But I think the challenge for us as a sports sector is, how do we help them take the first step to kickstart activity when we're not in the confines of a research experiment? Because obviously we can't just pair up a researcher with every woman going into the future to help her get active, unfortunately, although maybe that's the answer. So in order to help think of ways to overcome the barriers, we're really keen that from this research we have developed some solutions and not just a list of problems. So we've got sort of 4 areas of focus here that we really need to look at in order to help women get active. First one's around possibility. And this is around generating awareness of exercise in 2 ways. First of all, as relevant for 40+ women in the sense that it's not too late for them to do whatever they want to do. You know, this is the time now to be active. It's not too late. But also we want to make sure that there are many more activities than, you know, gym, running, walking, swimming, which was the 4 activities they listed for us. We want them to be aware of so many more exciting things. So the second bit is around reframing. So reframing what exercise is, like I just said, you know, really painting a picture of endless possibilities, but also showing women that they can really come out of those self-imposed limitations and really challenging that idea of sporty versus not sporty and what that means in midlife, because actually anyone can do anything. We don't need to be limiting ourselves. The third bit's around consideration. So really helping them find those opportunities, because we found that women really didn't know where to look and weren't finding these great opportunities that existed on their doorstep. So really enabling them to identify that without having to spend loads of time doing it. Because as we've said, women in midlife just don't have free time. So we need to make it super easy for them. And then the last bit is around support. So that can be buddying up in during an exercise, you know, in an exercise class or in a sport or whatever it is, providing a bit of sort of emotional support. It can also be virtual. So there's some great programs out there that provide virtual support through Facebook groups or WhatsApp groups or their own online platforms that really provide that emotional support that will help women get and stay active. So in order to realize those sort of 4 different areas, we came up with 5 principles for the sports sector. And I'll just very briefly talk you through these. The first is around endless possibilities. And this is all about making sure that women in midlife have 1,000,001 opportunities to be active. And we want to make sure that there are all kinds of different team sports and activities that they can come to as beginners or as returners after 20 years away and really enjoy those things and take part in them. Because right now, women feel like at midlife, it's too late to do most activities, and we want to change that. This sort of goes hand in hand with the next one, which is all about the judgment-free zone. So we want there to be really welcoming and supportive environments for women to be active. And that part of that is, you know, having those beginner level classes for women in midlife so that they aren't coming into an environment where everyone around them already knows what they're doing. But it's also about the sort of ethos of the classes or the sport, and providing that sort of very clear communication up front that this is something for beginners or for people who aren't quite sure of themselves, or whatever it is. But you want that communication to come before the woman has to show up at the activity, because if the communication about this judgment-free zone is not there, then they're going to assume that the activity is just for people who already know what they're doing. The third is about support networks, which we've talked about a little bit. So really making sure that women have that sense of belonging, that once they show up at an activity, that there's this support network in place. And this can be as simple as a WhatsApp group for a team. It can be, sweatshirts that a whole team wears to just give that sense of belonging. But really giving women that sense that they're part of something and that they belong there. The fourth is around expanding the image of what sporty means. And this is about telling the stories of real women in midlife who have real challenges and have overcome them to be active. So those relatable role models. They're not the Olympics athletes who are incredible, but that's just never going to be most people. Not those role models, but really those real relatable role models. And as part of this, we actually partnered with Getty Images for this project. And they took some amazing pictures of 4 different women. The 2 bottom pictures on this slide are of some of those women being active and just finding something that they loved. And that's now, all of those pictures are now part of their Disrupting Aging collection. The idea being that when organizations are looking to buy images of women in midlife, like stock images for newspapers or whatever, they've now got a whole new representation of women in midlife that doesn't include, women sweating buckets or sitting with their head in their hand, which was primarily the pictures we were seeing. And then the last one is about making it relevant. So there's referencing those specific relevant benefits that we talked about earlier, that, improved sleep, improved well-being, all of these things that really speak to women in this time of their lives. So I'm just going to wrap up now, but before I do, I'm going to play you this incredible video that Getty put together based on those 4 women that they took pictures of, because I just think they're all incredible, and I just love playing this video anytime I get a chance. So I'll let them finish up this presentation for me.
Everybody seems to be a victim to it. So you accept that it's going to happen, and then you just go, well, I've just got to do it. And I thought, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to change this narrative. I can't stop it, but I can maybe make myself fitter for it.
I don't want to be suffering from coronary heart disease, osteoporosis, sarcopenia. I want to stave that off as far as possible, put those brick walls up, just live life to the full.
It's so important to be active and get out there and not just that, and meet other women that are the same as you and just have the same sort of problems and same fun, and you're all like a support group together, really.
It's just that feeling of camaraderie, that we're doing it together, and nobody pushes you, nobody forces you to go in. It's all very much a case of we all do it at our own pace and we support each other.
I probably don't know what I would have done if I hadn't had football. Knowing that I can actually be active while having fun has been so important to me.
It's nice kind of, and it's just women only space. It's just you women together, and you kind of rule the whole, you just feel like you rule the world actually when you're in class.
Women haven't often put themselves first. So I think now the opportunities are there, then they can actually have a bit of me time.
Let's get the conversation of menopause out there, because it's not something that should have a taboo and a stigma. It's not something to be ashamed of.
Great, let me just unoptimize the screen. Great, so I will stop sharing my screen because that is it for me. Thank you very much.
That was amazing. Thank you so much for that. I really enjoyed it, and that always love a good inspirational video. That was really good, so thank you. So if you've got any questions for Liz, just a reminder to pop them in the chat and we'll get them answered, or feel free to use that raised hand function and then we can get you unmuted and also come on. So just while we wait for the couple of questions, if there's any in the chat, one from myself really. So kind of based off all of the information you kind of presented there and all of that research that you've done previously, what would kind kind of be the one key thing, or the one key takeaway that each of us from this could action after this meeting, say, in order to help keep women active at that lifespan?
I mean, that's the question, isn't it? And I think I'll answer that twofold, just because I don't know exactly who's on the call today and what you all do. So I would say, as people, we should all be talking about menopause. So regardless of where you work, what you do, your age, your gender, let's stop making menopause a taboo. Let's talk about it. Because actually there are stats out there that say that women who are prepared for menopause have an easier experience. So we 100% need to be talking about it in every way that we possibly can, and just getting rid of that taboo. So I would say that to anyone doing anything. I think in terms of the sports sector, I think the non-judgment is key. I think sort of going out and supporting women in whatever way you can, in whatever role you play, if you work in the sector, who are in this life stage, who might not have been active for a long time, just really introducing them to any kind of activity that they think they could do. A walking group is good. Moving from inactivity to walking is great. And it might be, and I can see Leslie there walking herself, which is brilliant. So, that might be a gateway to something else, but it might just be something they do that they love, and that's great. But I think just removing the judgment in whatever setting that you're offering is so key, because there is so much judgment. You can just feel it coming off the women, and the fear of judgment.
Yeah, no, totally. That all makes sense. And there's a couple of questions coming in from Facebook. So one says, when you presented all the barriers to activity, what do you think you would say is the top barrier, and how can we overcome this as a woman, but also how can those around us help?
Yeah, so I would say, we've just talked about fear of judgment, and I think that's a big one. I think permission for time is the other issue. And that's also the most obvious area where people around women can support. So I think we saw during the pandemic with women of lots of different ages that there is a default expectation that women do caring work. And so if kids are home from school and they need to be homeschooled, the women are doing it. We saw that statistically proven over and over again. So I think there is an element generally for women, but including women in this life stage, of people around them stepping up and doing their bit. And it's a big ask, and I recognize that. But I think sort of hand in hand with that is also normalizing that women are going to be active. So over and over again, we hear, especially from women with kids, that it's totally normal for their husbands to go out on Saturday for a kickabout every Saturday. They don't, make a big deal of it. They just go out. But for women, they have to clear the schedule. They have to prepare everything for their partner. They have to make sure everything is in place so that they can do that. And that is just adding barrier after barrier after barrier. And so I think that permission for time, and then supporting women to take that time, is really key for everyone around her.
Yeah, no, 100%. That definitely makes sense. And then just something that's like in my head as we go through this, like a lot of everyone on this call would kind of be not like aware of these things, but want to make that change. But how do we kind of encourage maybe people outside of this like bubble almost, and that it is important, and that these are considerations, and that maybe they are turning that sort of blind eye to all of those barriers that are there that they might not even realize? Sorry, that's such a massive question.
It's a massive question. And I think you've hit on something really problematic, which is that I think some of these conversations are self-selecting. I think a lot of conversations about menopause, the people who come to them are the people going through it. And certainly you see that in terms of the apps out there and all of the programs being created for women, which are brilliant. And you see exactly who's creating them. And it's women who went through menopause and found that there was no support out there for them. And so they created it themselves. And that is absolutely brilliant that that's happening. But I think it's speaking to exactly the problem you're talking about, which is that wider society is not talking about these issues. We're talking to each other, essentially. And I think Davina McCall's program, a couple months ago now, was absolutely brilliant in getting that conversation out there. I think from what I've heard about that, a lot of husbands watched that program and realized what was going on with their wives, and actually helped their wives get diagnosed because their wives didn't realize that they were going through menopause either. And so I think there is an untapped, well, the optimistic side of me thinks there's an untapped group of men out there who, of course, they care, because, I mean, for self-interested reasons, if nothing else, it's affecting their lives, either as employers, employees, sons, husbands, brothers, whatever, but also because they care about the women in their lives. And so I think if we start to bring men into this conversation more, that we are going to start to see bigger changes. The question, of course, is how to get them in, because you host something on menopause and, here we are. There are no men here. I assume you've not had any men at most of your female athlete, meetings, because why would they show up? But I think we need to work harder on that. Unfortunately, I don't have the answers necessarily on how, but
yeah, no, definitely 100%. It was just something that's always in my mind there. There's another one on Facebook that says, I work in a gym environment. How can I make this space more comfortable for women at this age stage? And how can I get the people at the gym to consider this?
I mean, I think there's probably an argument, you'd have to put it together, but there's probably a financial argument to make to your colleagues and the manager and the owners of the gym that this is probably a group with a fair amount of, depending, they might have a little bit of disposable income, more so than 20 somethings for sure. And so there's a financial argument that I think you could probably make. In terms of how to make it more accessible, I think you need to look at marketing. So who's out there on your promotional material? What do they look like? Do they look like normal people, or do they look like people who live in the gym? Are they 20? Are they 40? Are they a whole mix? What's going on there? Telling the stories of women who are in midlife, I think, is really useful. So if you have someone who, has found something at the gym that they love, is it weight training? Is it, whatever it is? And you could get them to talk about it, even anonymously, but featuring them and their story in your promotional material could help. I think also once women take that first step and show up at the gym, making sure that an induction is really friendly and really helpful, and sort of asking them what they'd be interested in, and then really focusing on that part of the gym. So providing that additional support, I think, is a pretty easy way to get women to feel like they belong in that space and to sort of make them feel really welcome.
Yeah, no, those are all really interesting key points as well. And we've got a direct message here that says, do you have any examples of clubs, project, businesses leading the way with this in terms of showing women what different activities they can get involved in?
Yeah, so one of the women in that video, Carol Bates, runs something called the Crawley Old Girls Club. And essentially it's a football club for women who missed out on football in school because, of course, the ban on women's football wasn't lifted until relatively recently. And there's this whole generation who are now in midlife, later midlife, I would say, and going through menopause, who missed out on football. And she started this club exactly for that reason. And it is just the most welcoming, inclusive club. She has different sessions. She has walking football, but also sessions sort of for beginners, and then returners as well, so that you can pick the session that's right for you, that doesn't feel overwhelming, and just come and enjoy yourself. And I think what came out really clearly from her in that film at the end was how much it's just about fun. And I think that that's so key, is really stressing that fun element and showing women that they can make friends and enjoy themselves during that. So I think she's a great example of what you can do. I think, there's also, there's an organization called Menopause that does sort of fitness classes geared very specifically to sort of the needs of women going through menopause, thinking about weight bearing exercises that can improve bone strength, all of that, but also then has a social element. So I think it's about 15 minutes of the hour-long class is spent really chatting, talking about what women are going through, being able to just say the M word, being able to say menopause in that setting. And that sort of really, again, gives that sense of belonging, and that sense that this is a space for you. So those are just a couple of examples. There are more out there. There's so many, not enough, unfortunately, but there certainly are.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Thank you for that. And then, sorry, I'm losing my voice here. When you were kind of talking about role models and those being relatable, I thought it was really interesting that when I was looking for images just to go on the social media for these sessions and literally couldn't find anything anywhere other than those ones, those typical ones that you did mention. Could you just point us towards those sort of video clips and the images again? Because I know you mentioned that, where can we go for more information on that?
Yeah, so that's with Getty Images. I think that they've made you do have to pay for those images, but I think they've made them as cheap as possible. So if you go onto their website and search for those images, then they're there.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And then finally, Liz, before we end the meeting, I wondered if you could just provide any more information for those who maybe want to know a little bit more either about the charity or this work, where they can go to sort of find that in terms of a website, social media, etc.
Absolutely. So womeninsport.org is your first stop. If you go to our research and advice service, you can find our podcasts, our reports, including this one. You can find more information about what we've done with Getty Images. And there's a longer video there that makes me cry every time. So you can check that out. You can see all of our other research. We have lots of research at the minute on teenage girls that we've been developing over the past few years, but as well about coaching, about women in the sport workforce and developing that. So all kinds of research on womeninsport.org. And then we're on Twitter at Women in Sport, and Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. So, find us wherever, just search Women in Sport.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. And I think that's all the questions answered there as well. So a massive thank you to you, Liz, for that presentation and allowing us to ask those questions. And a big thank you to everyone also who joined us. It's been great and I hope you all enjoyed it as well. This session has been recorded, so it'll be available to view in a couple of days to anyone who missed it or those who just like to watch it again. And then just a final reminder again that there'll be no monthly meet next August, just because we're taking that little break, but we will be resuming back with these meetings in September with even more brilliant guest speakers diving into all those other areas of female specific health and performance. So watch out for those further updates coming soon. But apart from that, that's all from me, and I hope you all have a lovely little summer break at some point, whatever you might be doing. And yeah, I'll see you all again in September. And thank you again, Liz, for that amazing presentation.
Thanks, everyone.
Liz, I'll just wait until everyone drops off and then I'll chat. Let me just pause that recording.